New details now surrounding accusations that retired NFL quarterback Brett Favre used welfare funds.
$5 million in welfare funds. Welfare funds.
He robbed from the poor to give to the richest.
He was Robin Hood.
Yeah.
For the past 2 years, Brett Favre and Shannon Sharpe have been engaged in a heated dispute related to comments made by Sharpe during an episode of Undisputed back in 2022. Favre quickly threatened legal action against those that criticized him, and eventually sued Shannon Sharpe, who refused to apologize for his comments. 2 years later, after expensive legal proceedings, Sharpe is an undefeated 2-0 against Favre, with both the District Court and Court of Appeals rejecting Favre's claims. So what's behind the dispute? Well, in recent years, Mississippi has been embroiled in scandal relating to the misuse of approximately $77 million of federal welfare funds granted to Mississippi, the state with the nation's highest poverty rate. The scandal hit the sports world in September 2022, when it was reported that former Mississippi Governor Phil Bryant worked with NFL Hall of Famer Brett Favre and others to channel at least $5 million of state welfare funds to build a new volleyball stadium at the University of Southern Mississippi, USM being Favre's alma mater and the place where Favre's daughter played volleyball. Prior to the news, Favre had received significant credit for raising funds to construct the volleyball stadium without any mention of welfare funds. The $5 million originated from temporary assistance for needy families federal grant money. When Brett Favre's connection to the scandal was first reported, outrage ensued. The story was widely reported across major news outlets and virtually every major sports network. Many called out Favre for his reported involvement in misappropriated welfare funds meant to help the poorest residents of Mississippi. Notably, Shannon Sharpe ripped into Favre on Undisputed.
You got to be a sorry mofo to steal from the lowest of the low. Skip, Brett Favre is taken from the underserved. You made $100+ million in the NFL. He wanted to seem so philanthropic. He wanted to change the perception of the narrative. He take money for some damn volleyball arena. He stole money from people that really needed that money.
Yep.
Man, this is embarrassing. How can you got to be really low to take from the poorest of the poor? But he's been a sleazeball. He's been shady for a very, very long time.
Favre was furious with the media's response and filed defamation lawsuits against some of his critics a few months later, including Pat McAfee, Shannon Sharpe, and former Mississippi Auditor General Shad White. To understand each side's position in the dispute, let's look at the details of the welfare scandal. The Mississippi Welfare Fund scandal involved the misappropriate use of millions of dollars in federal welfare funds granted to the state of Mississippi in the late 2010s. The money was intended to assist needy families, but much of Mississippi welfare funds were granted to non-profit organizations in Mississippi that had little or nothing to do with welfare programs. Now, one such non-profit was the Mississippi Community Education Center, which was run by Nancy New and her son Zachary New. Both Nancy and Zach eventually pled guilty to charges related to misusing public money and agreed to testify against others involved in the scandal. They also pled guilty to federal charges for wire fraud. Nancy New's guilty plea included an acknowledgement that they took part in spending millions of dollars of welfare money for a volleyball center at the University of Southern Mississippi. But what does this case have to do with Brett Favre? Well, Favre attended University of Southern Mississippi, and Brett Favre apparently worked with Nancy New to obtain money for the new volleyball center. Text messages obtained by Mississippi Today revealed that Favre began working with Nancy New in 2017, just before his daughter began attending Southern Mississippi and became a member of the volleyball team. Now, Favre claims that he did not know the nonprofit money going to the volleyball center came from Mississippi welfare funds, but text messages revealed in 2022 show that Favre worked with Nancy New to get that money, and his text messages seem to show that his biggest concern was if things were leaked to the press. Let's look at the messages. August 3rd, 2017. Brett Favre, 4:35 p.m. If you were to pay me, is there any way the media can find out where it came from and how much? Nancy New, 6:26 p.m. No, we never had that information publicized. I understand you being uneasy about that though. Let's see what happens on Monday with a conversation with some of the folks at Southern. Maybe it will click with them, hopefully. Brett Favre, 6:59 p.m. Okay, thanks. Now, a day later, August 4th, 2017, Nancy New, 1:20 p.m. Wow, just got off the phone with Phil Bryant. He is on board with us. We will get this done. Brett Favre, 1:21 p.m. Awesome. I needed to hear that for sure. On August 3rd, 2017, Favre asked Nancy New via text whether the media could find out where the money would come from. Nancy New assured him that the information would not be public and that Governor Phil Bryant was on board with the arrangement. What makes it worse is that Favre was publicly named as a donor for the new volleyball facility and praised for his generosity, but the money was coming from welfare funds intended to benefit the neediest people of Mississippi who don't play for the volleyball team. But that's not all. Part of the deal was that the nonprofit ran by Nancy New would hire Brett Favre for speaking engagements. The money for those speaking arrangements would go to the volleyball arena. When it was all said and done, Favre was paid $1.1 million for speaking fees, and that money went towards the arena. The only problem? Brett Favre never gave any speeches, so $1.1 million of welfare funds went to Favre for non-existent speaking arrangements, and that money was used to build a volleyball facility for USM. Brett Favre has since paid back $1.1 million to the state after former state auditor Shad White demanded repayment. The state of Mississippi continues to demand that Favre pay interest on the $1.1 million, which Favre has been unwilling to pay. Now, when the text messages were reported in September 2022, shedding more light into Favre's involvement in the welfare scandal, the story was discussed on every major sports network. The Hall of Fame QB denied knowing that the money came from welfare funds, but the text messages paint a bad picture, and sports media let him hear about it. Favre, of course, was furious with what was said about him by sports commentators, and he went as far as to file defamation lawsuits against some of his critics a few months later, including Pat McAfee, Shannon Sharpe, and former Mississippi Auditor General Shad White. So what does this mean? Well, according to Black's Law Dictionary, defamation is the taking from one's reputation or the offense of injuring a person's character, fame, or reputation by false and malicious statements. Favre's legal team took an aggressive approach, and one of Favre's attorneys, speaking to Jason Whitlock, made bold claims about the lawsuit against Pat McAfee.
We're going to see how quickly Pat McAfee learns how the court systems really work in this country. And we'll see. If he wants to go pro se, I'm all for it. Let him try that. My guess is he's going to get a lawyer and someone's going to try to come back, figure out how he needs to behave and what he should be doing.
A couple months after the lawsuit was filed, Brett Favre and Pat McAfee settled their case, with Favre dismissing the case after Pat McAfee made a statement clarifying that he was not commenting on personal knowledge.
My statements, expressed in comedic style, were based solely on public information. As I have previously stated, I respect the hell out of Brett Favre, the football player, and his Hall of Fame career on the field, and I have no personal knowledge about any case involving Brett in Mississippi. I am pleased to report that based solely on me again clarifying these points now, with no settlement paid, Brett is withdrawing his suit against him.
Shannon Sharpe, meanwhile, refused to apologize. In response to the lawsuit filed in Mississippi, Sharpe's attorney filed a motion to dismiss. Fans of Sharpe know that he grew up in rural Georgia without access to indoor plumbing or running water. It seemed that Sharpe felt like he needed to speak for the impoverished people of the rural South, the same people harmed by the Mississippi welfare scandal. Sharpe has explained on his Nightcap show that he cannot apologize for his comments.
Me, I wasn't going to issue an apology because if I'd have issued an apology, I'd have felt I had done something wrong.
So rather than apologizing or making a clarifying statement like Pat McAfee, Shannon doubled down and decided to let the battle play out in court. Now, when a person is sued and received a complaint filed by a plaintiff, that person typically does one of three things. 1. Attempt to quickly settle the case before either party has to incur additional legal fees and risk. 2. File an answer with the court which responds to each allegation made in the complaint. Or 3. File a motion to dismiss. Shannon and his legal team selected the third option. It's important to understand that when filing a motion to dismiss as an initial response to the lawsuit, a defendant is asking the court to dismiss the case for failing to state a claim upon which relief can be granted. Keep in mind that this type of motion to dismiss comes before any evidence has been presented. In this case, the motion to dismiss was Shannon's first response to the allegations. A motion to dismiss filed at the beginning of a lawsuit is essentially saying that even if the alleged facts are true, the plaintiff would not be entitled to legal victory. In other words, Shannon Sharpe's motion argued that what Shannon said wasn't defamation as defined by Mississippi and federal law, so there was no reason for the lawsuit to continue. Now, you may know that the most common defense to defamation is that the statements made are true. Defamatory statements must be false. But that was not what Shannon was arguing here. That type of defense comes after evidence is presented. Instead, given the early stages of the case, Shannon's motion focused on two key legal arguments. First, that Shannon Sharpe's commentary on Favre used hyperbole and loose, figurative language that is protected by the First Amendment. Sharpe argued that the First Amendment protections in defamation cases are rooted in the allowing and promoting national debate on public issues. Second, that Sharpe's opinions were based on publicly reported information about Favre's involvement in the welfare scandal. Sharpe argued that Mississippi law allowed him to make statements of opinion on disclosed and publicly reported information. Essentially, Sharpe argued that he was not making up any facts. He was giving his opinion on what was widely reported in the news. For the district court, the key question was whether a reasonable fact finder could conclude that the statements Sharpe made on the air would imply an assertion that Favre actually stole money from the poor. The court analyzed the facts and relevant Mississippi law, concluding that the context in which Sharpe's remarks were made, including the tenor of the broadcast as a whole, the format of the program and its audience, and the fact that viewers were told Favre was not charged with the crime, forecloses Favre's claim that a reasonable viewer would have thought that Sharpe was actually accusing him of committing larceny. Because Sharpe's comments are constitutionally protected rhetorical hyperbole using loose, figurative language, they cannot support a defamation claim as a matter of law. With that background, the district court granted Shannon's motion to dismiss on October 30th of last year, ending the lawsuit before it even began. Shannon, of course, acknowledged that first victory on Nightcap.
The United States District Court of Southern District of Mississippi dismissed Brett Favre's lawsuit, defamation lawsuit against me today. I'm glad it worked itself out. I'm glad this is behind me and I can move on with my life and whatever transpired. Like I said, I just hope the people in Mississippi have their day in court.
But the story did not end there. Favre filed an appeal asking a federal district court to overturn the district court's dismissal. Favre argued that the case should have proceeded to allow a jury to determine whether he was defamed. Not long after, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals held a hearing on the appeal where attorneys for both Favre and Sharpe made arguments, and a couple months after the hearing, in a Hail Mary attempt, Favre's attorney wrote a letter to the Court of Appeals asking the court to consider a separate case, that of former governor of Alaska and Republican vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin, who is pursuing a defamation claim against the New York Times. That case was previously dismissed, but in August 2024, a Court of Appeals reinstated the case to allow Palin to take it to a jury trial. The case deals with a different set of facts, but Favre's team made the case that the judge in his case was too quick to dismiss and should have allowed the case to proceed to a jury, like in Palin's case. But Sharpe's attorney wrote their own letter to the Court of Appeals, arguing that the reasons for dismissal were completely different and not relevant to Shannon Sharpe's statements. And finally, on September 16th, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected Favre's appeal. The court explained that Shannon Sharpe's statements were based on published reporting, and that his statements are better viewed as strongly stated opinions about the widely reported scandal. Sharpe's comments were not his own assertions of fact, but commentary of public reports. Unlike the district court, the Court of Appeals did not focus on Sharpe's statements being hyperbole. Instead, the Court of Appeals focused on the idea that Sharpe was permitted to offer opinions on reported facts. In doing so, Sharpe was not claiming to have unique knowledge about what happened behind the scenes. He was simply interpreting the situation and offering his opinion on Favre's reported and public actions. So what now? Well, Sharpe has made it clear that he wants to move on, and that he will not apologize because he does not believe he did anything wrong. Brett Favre seems like he will fight this until he is out of legal options. Both, of course, have deep pockets and can afford to fight this in court for as long as necessary. But at the end of the day, Brett Favre's options are limited. He can appeal one more time to the highest court in the land, the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is highly unlikely to review this type of claim game, but no one would put it past Favre to try. As for now, Shannon Sharpe has dominated this 2-year legal battle. Meanwhile, Brett Favre is scheduled to testify before Congress about the Mississippi welfare scandal. Perhaps that testimony will provide more detail about what really happened and what Favre knew about the welfare money. Or perhaps Shannon Sharpe was right about the whole thing. Let us know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching Sports Pantheon.